This is Mildred Inbody at home. And she's going to tell us about her family history. She was born
up west of Pendroy in a ranch home.
what year?
1922, September 16th.
How old does that make you?
It makes me 72 or 100, I'm not sure which.
Close enough. Okay. Who were your parents?
George and Sarah McKee.
What did they do?
They were ranchers.
Okay. Tell me about growing up.
Well, it was during the midst of the probably the greatest part of the Depression. And it wasn't easy for them to even keep us kids going sometimes. Dad worked away from home a lot of times, and Mom worked for some of the neighboring ranchers on shorter jobs like lambing and haying and that sort of thing. Sometimes, but we went to either Blackleaf School, or then we moved down a little closer to Penroy and finished up at the Harmony School.
Did you have any brothers?
I had two brothers, one older than I, Ray, and one younger than I, Francis.
Poor dear. I know how these brothers are. Do you have any stories about growing up?
I think it was a matter of just survival during that time. On a ranch you have chores, so us kids always had to have responsibility, help with them. As soon as Ray got big enough to work with a larger crew or do larger jobs, then Mom and I milked up to 13 cows at times and sold the cream, wheat, and butter, and fed bum lambs on the leftover skim milk. Bum lambs are orphan calves, almost anything like that. Mom raised turkeys several years, not a great many of them, but it was a full-day job to get them ready for the market. And there used to be a kind of a co-op that operated down here in Shoto that did take care of those small batches of birds.
But you still have to dress them out and everything for them.
Well, no, you just picked them. You sold them with the innards in. And you didn't wash them. You didn't get water on the feathers because it cut down the time that they were before they spoiled. So they had a way of sticking a blood vessel or a knife in their throat, cut the throat, and then the whole body relaxed. And then the feathers were, Mom and Dad, and sometimes us kids, as we got a little bit bigger, had to spend most of the day. 25 or 30 birds is quite a bit.
Did you have to kill them, or did someone
No,
else?
Grandpa did that, or Mom, I didn't.
Oh, that'd be sick. What other animals did you have on your farm?
Well, we had milk cows, and we had a few sheep, and we had a pet goat that my younger brother liked, but we had to get rid of because it'd get out with the sheep and get to running, and then the sheep would lose their lambs. And that little old goat had come up under the window where Francis slept, and it just like they were having a conversation sometimes. That was kind of a sad day for him.
Yeah.
How long did he have it?
About, I think 7 or 8 months.
Did you have any horses?
Yeah, we had saddle horses.
That'd be rad.
Yeah. It wasn't so much fun riding when you had to, when it was cold.
You grew up on two different places, didn't you? One by Pendroy and one in Blackleaf?
We lived up in the Blackleaf area. We moved a couple times. And then when we moved down to Harmony School, we lived in a couple places there before Dad bought the one that they finally kept.
Did you have any problem with moving around a lot? Did you have any problem getting readjusted and all that?
I missed the trees. It was so barren down where we lived, and we had always lived close to the mountains with trees around, and I missed those dreadfully for a few years. Otherwise, it's the same old thing, whether you're milking the cow in this barn or that one.
Yeah, I guess so.
As long as the family's the same and the
Yeah.
jobs are the same,
Yeah.
it's just like home.
Any cats?
Well, I suppose we had barn cats, I'm sure we did. We didn't have house cats.
Do you have any stories about school?
Well, it was get up in the morning and help with the milking, unless Dad was home when it was cold. Mom would get up and get our horse saddled up and everything until Ray got to be a pretty good size, and then he took that over. And then when he went off to high school, I had to do it because my other brother was younger.
Did you have to ride your horse to school?
We had to ride our horses to school, and they always had a little shelter barn. You'd tie the horse in there for the daytime. And then he was eager to get home and eat and get water, and we were eager to get home from school.
Did you ever have any adventures with the weather and your horse?
And not really. Dad always said if the visibility was so poor that we couldn't see where we were going, leave the horse alone because he'd take us home. They have a much stronger sense of direction than we do. And he always gave the horse oats when we got home from school, so the horses were looking forward to coming home. And we were living quite close to the school in 1928 when they had a killer blizzard come through there. And the teacherage was on the back of the school. So the teacher kept the boys over there and kept a fire going. And the kids lined up, and it was probably a half a block over to our house, but they had to follow the fence around in order to get to us. One girl lost a mitt and then got her pretty badly frosted little finger out of it. And then one of the men got to our place about 3 or 4 in the morning. Mom stayed up because Frances was a baby, and she had one bed and she had 4 of us crossways on it. We weren't real big either. And when Sid Campbell had finally got there, he had started out 4 different times. His eyes froze shut, and his horse took him home. And the last time he managed to keep his eyes, probably the storm was abating a little bit, and he managed to keep his eyes open and see where he was going. But that was Dad's feeling of caution always, is if the horse wants to go in a certain direction and you don't know where you're at, let him pick the way. And I went to a country school where first year or 2 I was in school, there were about 17 or 18 kids. And then that size dropped down to about, when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, it was about down to 8 or 10 children. Some of the families had moved away because it was bad drought and no way to make a living up there.
That's all ranching up in the Blackleaf, isn't it? No farming?
Well, at one time, it was when it was homesteaded. It had a lot of buffalo grass on it, and they thought that it was farming ground, so they plowed it up. Well, there was very little topsoil, and by 1916, most of the soil that they plowed up blew away, and they had a gravel bed. So there was no more farming for a number of years.
I wouldn't even think the grass would get going very well then.
Well, it didn't on some of those gravel bars. You know, that's stuff left over after a glacier passed over there. And it had to be a fairly good spring for the grass to even get good. It wasn't good enough to hay, but it was good enough to pasture.
What about high school, your living situation in high school?
Well, when it came time to start to high school, we had no bus. We weren't close. There was a bus to Pendroy, but we weren't close enough for me to use it. So I had to have a place to stay in Shoto. And at that time, there were a lot of people that would take a high school girl for her board. She worked for her board and room because the folks were desperately hard up trying to get started. And so that's what I did all 4 years. I worked for my board and room.
That'd be kind of cool, I think.
Oh yeah, you get home once Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter is about the.
Oh, I thought you went home on the weekends.
Oh no, very seldom between the vacations because there was always work to be done and you had to stay there and help.
Just like Mom, slave driver.
Yeah, right.
Well, the people that I worked for were all good to the extent that if I wanted to go to church or to youth group or that sort of thing, I could always have time for that.
Who did you stay with?
Well, the first year I stayed with a couple named Snyder, and she was going down to Great Falls to have a baby, and I was supposed to look after the little fellow that they had, and her sister would do it during the day, but Mom didn't think it was a real good situation with no living there, with no woman adult with us. And so I moved, the preacher wanted help, so I moved down to Methodist parsonage and worked for them for about 6 weeks. And then Mrs. Dover decided she had to go and take care of her mother or his, I don't remember which. She took the 2 preschool children and left, and that left me again kind of high and dry. But there was so nearly, I think about 6 weeks left, and I got to go to the dormitory for that last 6 weeks. And then the next 2 years, I worked for little Annie Thompson, and she had a pretty big house, and she rented rooms to school kids who could not go back and forth. You know, now they would have been driving or there'd been a bus, but at that time there wasn't. And the country roads weren't very good, so quite a number of the people around here, like Hank Smith and Earl Ledesky and the Peebles boys, and quite a few from up around the mountains at various times lived there. And so the weekends were really busy because I had to change all those beds upstairs and clean the rooms.
So you were still working for your keeping in the dormitory then, or even with
No,
that
that
lady's
was
house?
it. That was the next year, and I stayed with her for 2 years. And then the last year, Mr. and Mrs. Halbert Daly decided they wanted some help, but they kind of were wondering if there was anybody that could live with their 4 boys. And I had 2 brothers, and I said nothing they do will surprise me. So I worked there the last year. And that was just in their family, just the family.
Was it true? Nothing they did surprised you?
That's about right. One of the boys came up with a headache one day, and they took him to the doctor. It lasted so long, and they found pressure on his optic nerve. And at that time, there weren't the specialists that there are now in Great Falls. So the boy and his father took the train back to Rochester, to Mayo Clinic, and Mrs. Daly and the kids in school and I were home wondering what was happening, but Mr. Daly kept us pretty well informed. And he had a blood clot, and they drained it. And, you know, now they don't think anything of these things occurring up, but they didn't diagnose most of them in time at that time.
How big was Shoto then?
Well, about the size it is now. There were different businesses, and probably some of these subdivisions out around the edge, like here, and there was this Coghill edition, was always a part of the town when I was in high school. But there were, not the country club edition wasn't built, and a lot of that out northwest of the school is pretty new.
What about the school? Was it just the old high school and a dormitory?
Yeah, they closed down the dormitory and took it out before I got through high school.
Where was the dormitory?
Where the principal's office, part of the grade school is right now.
Oh.
How many kids could stay there at a time?
I think it probably had a pretty fair capacity when it was built, because there a lot of children did go there. But it was getting difficult to find someone that would be willing to do the work and feed the kids. That was getting to be a hard job, because during the Depression, the people wanted a year-round job, not just school year or something.
Was the old high school like the top of the line or something then?
Well, no. It had some cracks that had developed because of settling in the soil, but the windows leaked a lot of air, cold air. In the study hall, you could put your coat on pretty regularly in the wintertime,
Oh.
because it was in the southwest part of a big room, and the whole side was windows.
You must be way younger than Grandpa. He said when he started high school, or when he was going to high school, it was the latest thing in high school.
Yes, but I'm 4 years younger than Grandpa, remember?
4 years, I didn't know it was that. There's only 2.
Nope.
That's not.
He was through high school before I started.
Ask. How did you meet you and Grandpa?
Well, it's a funny thing. I went down to a roller skating party and I really fell for it.
Literally.
Literally, that's right.
Did you have any jobs after high school?
Yeah, I worked in Fairfield. I worked in a restaurant in Shoto the summer after I graduated. And then I got a job at what was then the farm security that was out at Greenfield. The offices were out there, but it was a government office. And I worked out there. I went to work in October and I quit in October, just about a year.
Will you tell me about your wedding? What day was it?
October 30th, 1941.
Is it just some coincidence that it happened to be right before Halloween, or just...
Well, yes. I had to wait for Glenn to get some money from Harvest and get some land titles cleared up before we left.
Where was your honeymoon?
California.
Oh.
We went down to Los Angeles and visited Glenn's adopted brother. And while we were there, we took a weekend trip out to Catalina Island.
Where's that?
It's about 30 miles out in the ocean from Los Angeles, and it's a resort area. We took, the thing that I enjoyed as much as anything was glass bottom boat.
Well,
There
that'd
was
be
glass bottom all the way out?
Yeah.
What did you see through there, like fish and stuff?
Well, yeah, they'd go, that wasn't the boat we traveled out there on, but after we got out there, and you bought a package where you paid for some of your meals and your rooms, and they were reserved for you, and the trip back and forth. And that was a fair-sized boat. It didn't have too much motion, or I'd have probably been a sick cookie, but I managed pretty good. And we went, from there we drove up the coast, saw some of Glenn's family up in Portland and Seattle. And we got home about Thanksgiving. And
Took that long over there? Whoa.
yeah, over a month.
That'd be
Because,
rad.
as a matter of fact, we'd only been home less than a week when the December 7th fiasco came.
What was that? Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, gee.
And we'd gotten up and puttered around the house for a little bit, and I'd laid down for a nap, and I don't think Glenn had the radio on, because some friends stopped to tell us that we were at war. Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
So how did that change your life, your new life?
Well, it didn't seem to immediately. Glenn had been running the farm anyhow, and Lucille had been living there in Clark, and she wanted to go out to the coast. Harold was out at the coast getting ready to get out of his draft status, had gone up to Seattle, but he had to leave word where he would be, and before he got started home from Montana, he was back at Fort Lewis. So Lucille then drove out, within a month or so after we were married, or maybe 2 months, and she worked out there near in the shipyard or cannery or something.
Were they married then?
And then they were married out there on February 2nd. And when I came home, Grandpa had been batching, and guess what shape the kitchen was in?
Oh,
I had to
Grandpa.
wash dishes before I could fix a meal.
Well, what about your wedding? Where did you get married?
We got married in the Methodist parsonage, and my parents, and Clark and Lucille, and Ray, my 2 brothers, were there, and then we had a dinner in the basement of the Shoto drugstore at that time. They had a little dining room, and they'd cater meals, small groups, and we had a meal down there, and it happened to be the day that the church was having their fall festival type thing. It's very much like what they're having now. So Mrs. Dover had to stay in the kitchen because the women were coming over and running back and forth. At that time, they were side by side where the parsonage is now. And she had to keep people from bursting into the living room. We were married just by the preacher, and Ray and Lucille stood up with us. And then we had our dinner.
What dress were you married in?
I had a blue dress. Now it would probably go halfway around my arm.
Things do change.
Yes, things do change. And then while we were having our dinner, Ralph Caskey found out that we'd gotten married. He was a friend of Glenn's. And he and Leona were going to decorate our car, and they did a little bit. But the joke was on them because we used Lucille and Clark's new car. And Clark had to wash the car before he went back to school, so they had just married.
Clark, you probably stand to have that happen to him.
And I think we probably got as far as Butte the first night. And of course, people were apprehensive of what was going to happen to the cars, and we stayed at a hotel there, and we figured we'd be all smeared up with Halloween stuff. And it just so happened that the kids took pity on an out-of-county license, and they didn't do a thing to our car.
Well, that was the day before Halloween, though.
Yeah.
Did you get out of town soon enough to...
Yeah, we got out before. There were a lot of cars decorated that night, but on the street. But
Well, at least kids don't do that now. We're
no.
way past that.
Well, I always figured Glenn lucked out too, because most of the time you get a witch about that time of the year.
Yes, you did luck out, didn't you?
Mhm.
You, but not. Do you have any children?
Do I have any children?
Yes.
Yes, I have Roy and Carol and Betty.
What day were they born?
Well, Roy was born April 29th, 1944.
And that makes him 50 now? Which is
Yes.
rather old now.
Yes, he's an old codger.
I know. He's going to be eligible for senior citizen discounts by the time I graduate.
Yeah, isn't that sickening?
I know. Jeez.
And then Carol was born just before the first of the year. She was born December 30th, 1945. Sometimes she's 2 years younger than he, and sometimes 1, depending on the time of the year it is. And then Betty came struggling along about 8 or 9 years later.
Do you have any geeky stories about my dad?
Well, just offhand I can't think. he was a busy little fellow. And every time he'd see me sit down, we had room for one easy chair, and I'd go sit down in the chair. And so he'd want a drink of water, and I'd have to get up and go over and give him a drink of water, and then he'd tear like mad to get right in front of that chair so I couldn't sit down again.
Devil child.
Yes.
What about that time when you were watching him with his FFA thing? Or his 4-H little plot land he was farming? The thing that he was farming you were talking about sometime?
Oh, that one, he broke up 2 little pieces of part of our 40-acre yard. And when he'd get tired, he had a small tractor and a real small duck foot. When he'd get tired, why, he'd pull the duck foot out of the right ground and chase mice for a while.
Well, dedicated.
Took him a little while to get the job done.
What is that? My word. Alright. Any other stories about Dad? Come on, think.
Well, it seemed like every time we stopped the car when we were going anyplace, he wanted to run and climb a tree or something. I guess that was the ache coming out in him.
He does that all the time too. Now, Dad still does it. Oh yeah. Let's go climb a tree. Yeah, I bet.
Well, we took him and Carol and went down to through Kansas into Oklahoma when he was 4 and Carol was not quite 2. And one of my cousins had a little boy the same age as Roy, and so Roy and Morris were playing together, and Morris would shoot Roy dead. Roy'd fall to the ground, but then when a car would go past, he'd look up at it. And Morris kept saying, "You're dead, you can't do that."
What is novelties? Ooh, a car. Wow, I better go check
we
it
didn't
out.
see so many out in the country.
When did you get your first car?
Well, actually, Glenn had, and Clark and Lucille all had an interest in a black car, the Chevy in 1940. And then when we got married, Lucille and Clark decided that they should have a separate car. And they had gotten that just before we were married, so they let us take that on the honeymoon. And then when we came home, we hadn't been home. Clark had finished graduating that spring, and then he decided he'd go to school at Montana Tech. And he came home, I don't know, it was probably in January, told Glenn he was going to enlist. All his buddies were enlisting, and he knew he and Glenn both couldn't stay out of the service.
Where have you traveled to?
Well, Glacier Park. Actually, we have visited all of western states.
All of them?
All of them. The only 2 states that I haven't been in are North and South Carolina.
In the entire country?
Huh?
The entire country?
In our lower 48, yeah. And
We've
then
also
we've been
been
to
to
Hawaii and Alaska.
Oh, that is not fair, Mom.
Yeah, running around. Well, we didn't have to stay home for school for a few years because the country school didn't make such an issue out of it. We were going to be gone a little bit.
Well, I can miss 20 days a year, so we could still travel somewhere, Mom. Any particular favorite place you've traveled?
Glacier Park.
Which part? All of the 48 states you've traveled in.
That's I can't let a year go by without getting up there. Some years I had to let go by, and it really was, the year was incomplete without a trip to Glacier. I agree.
That's weird. I don't know. I never made that big of a deal out of it. I like going to California best. Well, California and Orlando.
Those were, of course, trips that weren't even, that type of entertainment wasn't even available.
Oh, you mean
What?
like going to Orlando?
Yeah.
Well, you probably
Or
didn't fly there.
we've gone back and forth to Los Angeles through there and San Diego several times.
So you took your kids to Disneyland.
Yeah, when Betty wasn't quite 4. Roy was an 8th grader. And then the next time we went down, Betty was an 8th grader.
Man, twice. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Gosh.
Yeah, I could get out and walk then, it was fun.
Your dad was a joy to have along.
Mhm.
Let's stop, we gotta climb a tree. What a word. Let's see. Oh, do you have any favorite memories?
And like what?
Any favorite memories?
Oh, I don't know. I think the whole life runs past you, and it's all interesting. It's always different.
Do you have any advice for the future?
Well, not really. Just don't hurry up and lose your childhood. Grow up and go to college and live a little bit before you tie yourself down with that.
When Chrissy was born and about the same time your mom died, then your mom gave Chrissy some spoons that had been your mom's?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell about those?
Well, I only thing I know is that this one rancher named Sid Campbell had given Mom and Dad these 6 serving spoons for a wedding present. And that was, Mom was at that time beginning to, she had made up her mind where she wanted to have most of her things go. And it was just a matter, we finally convinced her that maybe she would enjoy it more if she gave it than if she waited for me to dish it out to people. Because, you know, when all these things come at you, suddenly you've got more jobs than you've got time or memory. And I have done the same thing. I have names stuck on a lot of my special dishes.
Like all the ones you're gonna give me.
Yeah.
What was the thing about your parents or grandparents, and was it your grandmother that saved her dishes or silverware till she had her nice house and she never got the nice house?
It was a friend. It was Mrs. Harry Collins. And she didn't use anything that they were building a house when she had heart trouble and all of a sudden she was gone. And next Mrs. Harry Collins used the fancy pillowcases for a dog bed and things of that sort. So the joke at our house was, we're not going to save stuff, we're going to use it and enjoy it ourselves before Dad's second wife gets it.
Good advice.
A few years ago, you gave me this doll named Pearl for my birthday. 11th birthday, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is the doll.
Mm-hmm. This little doll was left abandoned in a homestead shack. People, I don't know whether they didn't have room in their trunk to take her or just what, but Mom had a friend named I can't think, Lucy O'Neill, and she used to walk around because there was a homestead on every quarter acre of that gravel bench that blew away and people dropped out. And she used to go look around, see what, just for a walk, you know, something for entertainment. And she found this doll suspended by wire so the mice couldn't get to her, hanging from a ceiling in a homestead shack. And it's quite a different doll to the cuddly things that they make now for the little girls. But this doll was kind of a fashion doll, and I always kept her tied into a little rocker that we had because the kid skin in her that made up her body was rotting. And I didn't play with her much. I made doll clothes and things. But the reason I got it was that Lucy McNeil was saving it for her first granddaughter. And her daughter didn't get married for so long, and she decided there was no hope for it. And since she knew Mom and knew me, I got the doll. And not too long afterward, she did have a granddaughter, but the doll was mine by then.
How old were you when you got the doll?
I think I might have been about 8, somewhere in that neighborhood. I was past the point where you roughhouse dolls or something, you know. And I did practice making a lot of doll clothes for her. I had fun doing that. And then just this last week, well, summer, you were 11, wasn't it?
Yep.
I had found somebody that would restore the body, and I was going to buy a new wig for it, and she said, don't, it's an antique, and if possible, if the original wig should be left on it. She styled it a little bit for me, but it is a human hair wig, and of course, a great deal of it is broken off. How it does, it's dead hair, and I never put a lot of water or spent a lot of time combing or brushing her hair or anything.
The face and hands, are they porcelain?
The face is porcelain, and the hands and the legs are, something like paper mache. Some of the fingers and toes were broken off, and this woman that used the naga hide as being similar to this kid's skin that was on her body, used this white naga hide to repair and refurbish her. And during the time that she had the doll, when she took the head off to pack some more stuff inside the cavity of the body, a lot of that filling had fallen out. She found a pair of black stockings for the doll that she said she thought
Inside the body?
they'd been stuffed inside and she thought they were original. But most of the stuff that this doll's wearing now is stuff that a lady that collects dolls had made for her because I couldn't sew at the time.
How long did the restoration of this doll take?
Well, actually, it took her about 6 weeks. She had it about 6 weeks. But in the meantime, when my girls were growing up, they neither one were real interested in dolls. And she was so fragile at that time with this kid skin wearing out that I just didn't get her out and give to them. And so it laid around here. I had it, from the time I was a child until the year you were 11. What year was that?
Let's see. I don't know, let's see.
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
Almost 4 years ago.
I just kept her,
91.
and I'd had her in Great Falls with a doll collector who was going to restore her, but that doll collector got sick. And so I hurried down when I heard she had cancer, and thought I'd hurry down and get my doll before it was lost. You know, things like that sometimes are lost. If there is someone sick and her family comes in to take care of her collection and whatnot, they don't know what there was or anything. And a friend had told me that very often happens when you have antiques being restored. So she said when you found out she was sick, you better go get the doll.
How come did I get it?
Well, you didn't get it when you were a little girl. I didn't have it restored, and I decided you were at 11, we were old enough to take care of it as an antique and a special thing. I really had many years of having her around the house and tied into this little rocker because her body is so, or her face and hands and feet are so breakable that Mom didn't want me to let children just roughhouse with her, which they do often with a doll. And so we left her tied in a chair.
Now we're going to go see that quilt of yours. Oops.
I'm going to have you take this so I can get up.
working on it.
Isn't she a pretty little lady? Video. Just this.
All right.
You want me to start telling you about my
Yep.
quilt? My great grandmother who lived in New Straitsville, Ohio, a mining town, and her friends would spend their afternoons quilting. They didn't have radios, they didn't have TV, they didn't have all kinds of those good things that we use now. And this was their recreation. And this was made sometime between 1830 and 1849. And when she died, my grandpa Harbaugh had this sent to him. Well, he and Grandma were closing down their house and their marriage and everything, and so Grandma had Mom take care of this. And Mom, for a little while, one place we lived had a guest room. And she thought it was so much fun to put this down on as a spread. But then it's gotten so fragile now that, and a lot of the fabric, this binding in particular, is called turkey red. And the dye kind of damages the fabric. There's more fraying on the binding, or if this had any abrasion or anything. And I wouldn't even begin to guess how many tiny stitches there were in it. But not only is it all hand appliqued, and it's appliqued with white thread, which indicates during one period of time when it could have been made. In 1830, a lot of the women that had babysitters or daycare helpers or whatever used to get together almost every afternoon and make quilts. And at the time that this was made, it was probably copied from some print fabric that had come, or the theme of it, that had come from England. And the women copied and enlarged these pictures and that sort of thing, and they used the white thread at that time. By 1850, my great-grandmother was dead, and so it had to have been done before that. But I treasure it highly because I think it's a beautiful piece of handwork that most of us don't know how to do ourselves nowadays, and certainly our children will never learn these things because they're too time-consuming.
What about the batting in the quilt?
Well, it's cotton batting. It's not very heavy. And of course, all of this quilting is all raised, so when they make a pattern, even these little tiny grape-shaped rounds, then they go either spread the thread or cut a thread or two and put extra quilting or extra fabric in there, and then sew it back up again, and that's how they got the raised design.
Well, doesn't it have cotton seeds in it? Isn't it raw cotton or something?
It could be. I think at the time that it was made, well, all during that period of handwork time, they didn't have access to the well-combed and well-fashioned fillers that we have now to put in quilts, and so they just probably got pretty raw material to do this.
So how long have you had that? When did your mom give it to you?
Well, she gave it to me in about somewhere around 1950. She and Dad were cutting down on their possessions, and it had been in her trunk for a long time, and I was going to use it in my my guest room. Well, I got it out, and I found that we were laying stuff on it and using stuff that was, we were using it to the point where it wasn't going to hold up at all if we kept it on. So then I put it in the trunk for a while. And finally I got a chance to hang it to display, and I've shown it at a few quilt shows. I don't think many of the young women, even the ones that learn to quilt, know how to do this, and I think it's called trapunto, raised quilting.
What was the name of the great-grandmother that made it?
Her last name was Harbaugh, and I'm not real sure what her first name was. I did know it one time, but I've forgotten. And she made many, many of them. Grandpa Harbaugh, when it was sent to him and his wife, he thought this was one of the less attractive ones. And so evidently they made some pretty fancy ones. And of course, you know, they didn't have queen-sized beds, and they didn't have a lot of the type of beds that we have. And this was a good bedspread size, and it isn't. It lays pretty good now on a double bed, but they didn't ever make anything big enough to fit the queen size that most of us use now.
Where did this great-grandmother live?
In New Straitsville, Ohio. That was an old mining town. And you may have heard somewhere in the background that there was a fire that burned, a mine that burned underground for 45 years. That's in the area that it was. You know, every time the miners would get, they'd want more money, and of course the owners were pretty scarce about giving any adequate wages, so they told me that the thing started, there was a little trolley, one of their little train ore cars, sitting outside the mine, and there'd been a meeting, and the owners weren't going to raise the price to the miners, and some miner flicked a cigarette into this ore car, and it had scraps in it, scrap paper and things. And somebody else gave it a shove, and it went underground. And that whole area now is peppered with what they call sinks, where that's caved in. But it burned for 45 years. They could never put it out.
It's amazing it could burn underground.
Yeah.
No oxygen.
Well, oxygen goes through the soil, and there was tunnels into the mine and things that I imagine at one time they might have stuffed those. I don't know, but when you get a coal fire, a coal vein burning, sometimes there's no way to put it out. And because of the smoke and the poison gases and things that come off in that smoke, they don't dare go down into it. Even now, probably it would be just plugged up.
Was that great-grandmother first generation American, do you know?
I'm not real sure, but I think she was. I didn't know too much about them because Grandma and Grandpa separated, and Grandpa wasn't around a lot. And he did visit us a few times and stay a little bit, but of course he, as a young man, left home as soon as he was able to get out and work. And that's, he probably didn't know a lot about it either. But as some of the relatives have come from New Straitsville that have been out here visiting, do you want to turn it off, honey? I can't stand any longer. My legs
Why
are
should we
shaking.
sit right here, and then she can just change the direction of the camera.
Oh,
right
well,
there on that corner would be wonderful. Chrissy, you can just back you up.
You tell me.
Hmm?
Will you tell me about this picture?
Well, it was taken on my second birthday by a traveling photographer that used to go out in the country and cruise around looking for jobs. And it was taken on my second birthday, and I don't know why Mom didn't have my older brother in it too, but she didn't. And I was fat then too, as you could see. But this company, when they sent the picture, they sent a little, like our little pins, and Dad wore that on his suit all his life. He didn't have fancy jewelry or boutonnieres or stuff, but that was always on his suit. And I'm not real sure, but it might have been buried with him.
I was just wondering where it had gone.
I'm not real sure. I can't remember enough about the funeral to realize whether it was on his suit or not. If I'd had anything to say about it, I probably would have suggested it go with him.
Did the picture come from the photographer in this frame?
Yeah. They got this and this little round button pin from the photographer, and I don't know anything about him, who he was or anything. But during the hard times, a lot of people took their skills out to the people because people in the country didn't have the money to come in and
There wasn't ever a matching one of Ray though, huh?
no, there never was.
That does seem funny that there wasn't.
Well, yeah,
One of him.
they could have had us both in there because he was 2 years older than I was and was a good size. But I don't know why it was posed this way. It's probably the foundation of the house I was born in,
And where was that at?
west of Pendroy, about 10 miles or 12. There's nothing there now but some of the foundation of the house and part of the old barn that hasn't collapsed.
I thought it was cool. Remember when we went up there? I thought that was cool.
You can still picture it in your mind, just like growing up there?
I can remember that there was a big window that I used to stand by and look out, and I think this was probably right beside the window. Yeah, I can still, just barely, a few things flash through my mind because by the time I was 3, we had moved away from there.
I have one of your grandchildren, as you know. Talk about your other ones, please.
Well, I have an older granddaughter than you,
Named?
Carol.
No.
Dawn, you mean?
Dawn. Yes.
Close.
And I have a younger great-granddaughter, 2 younger great-granddaughters,
Named?
Kara and Nikki.
All right, got mixed up. Good job.
and our kids were kind of far apart in age. There's 10 years between Roy and his younger sister. And our grandchildren have come in bunches.
Do you have any grandsons, or are we just going to talk about the girls?
Well,
All the important
I
ones.
have 3 grandsons. One of them's 6 years old, and one of them is 29 years old. And
Scotty, 11.
yes, Scotty is in the middle 11.
So what are the names of the other 2?
Oh, well, there's Dean, and there's Scotty, and there's Howie Bennett.
Conclusion?
Yes. Thank you for this interview. It's been most informative.
It's been fun. Every one of the kids that we've raised and prayed and thought
Try
about,
the best. Yes.
yes,
Yeah, I know.
they're all good kids. Every one of them's different. Well, yeah, you wouldn't want to get in a rut and have them all come out the same. Doesn't it, honey?
Whoop.